Hi everyone, welcome to Impact, the series on bullying and mental health. My name is Narda Duffey from Dynamic Consulting Solutions, and I'm your host. For the past few weeks, we've been addressing various aspects of bullying and mental health. We've discussed cyberbullying, face-to-face bullying. We've looked at characteristics of people who bully and their victims. We've talked about some mental health concerns, such as eating disorder. And tonight, we're going to continue in that vein. The focus tonight is on depression and anxiety. And my guest, Dr. Paul Clark, and I will be navigating our way and helping you viewers to get a better handle on how bullying can lead to such mental health concerns. Thank you, Dr. Clark, for being here.
Thank you, Narda.
Great. Maybe we can start sharing a little bit of your background with the audience.
Well, I began my career as a classroom teacher originally in about 2000, and I was a high school and elementary teacher, and over time I spent a lot of time counseling students, teaching in the classroom, but also spent a lot of time outside the classroom working with students and individual problems and families, what ends up being family therapy. And ultimately I did graduate work and became a professor at McGill and actually taught teachers. So yeah, so I did that for many years, and then ultimately I went back to my roots, I guess, and started working again with people one-on-one, and now I do counseling full-time in Mississauga. So, yeah.
Very wide, varied background.
Yeah.
And I'll start first with as your experience as a teacher, because we're talking about bullying, and I'm sure as a teacher you had lots of experience, good, bad, with the subject matter. Can you talk a little bit about what you've encountered? And
I would say when I was, when I started when I was 24 years old, and I was a teacher, so I knew I knew about as much about bullying as the next person. I wasn't bullied myself, and so when I experienced bullying, I think, like a lot of people, I had a natural aversion to bullying, but as to what to do with it or any kind of support that was available for it, that really didn't exist at the time. The difference between that was in 1990, and the difference between 1950 and 1990 in terms of bullying wasn't very significant. There hadn't been. What would happen when somebody was bullied? Well, if it was abuse, it was literally where it came to blows, you would punish the bully. But in other cases, yeah, I think, teachers would very often say the same thing that we were told, which is, toughen up, and you got to get used to it.
Get used to it.
That's right. Yeah, and unfortunately, looking back, I'm not sure that we had a clear idea of what was going on in terms of.
You've illustrated a wide expanse of experience, and you're identifying something significant, because as you're saying, the motto of the day, I guess, was suck it up. Tough, it will help them to become tough. And as an individual and as a therapist, I'm ashamed to admit this, but I do have to admit it. I came from that school as well, because when I first came in as a therapist, a counselor, working with people, and I would encounter incidents, or people would report, being bullied, that was kind of my sense. Well, it happens all the time. Kids do this to each other. It can't be that.
Yeah, and I guess we thought at the time that well, this life is like this.
Right.
There are bullies out there, and what's the best way to deal with it? If we somehow intervene in this, aren't we going to just aggravate the problem? Aren't we going to, weaken this child, or weaken, and they should be learning their own defense mechanisms.
Exactly.
And which was really, looking back, that made us, it was kind of dinosaur thinking that somehow you would, that this trial would, make you stronger, and you would overcome bullies, and you would go on to become a success the rest of your life because you had beaten the bullies off in your high school.
Dinosaur thinking? an appropriate expression, because really and when I look at myself then and my thinking and my approach and my understanding, the big thing was a lack of understanding, because it wasn't an issue that was being addressed. You know, it would happen, it would get swept under the carpet, or people would think, oh, it'll go away. But as we've seen, and I know from speaking with you before, because you've identified this all as well, for people who've experienced this kind of trauma, for the outsiders, we think it's gone away, but the reality is it doesn't, because in my experience, I've worked with people who they've had incidents that happened when they were in kindergarten, elementary school, and now they're in their 30s and 40s, and these moments, these traumatic moments, are still impacting their lives.
It's one of the most, you know, after some sort of, you know, dramatic physical abuse, or one of the, or emotional abuse, probably next in the line in terms of things that bring people into my office are some sort of bullying, some sort of bullying experience, and literally going back to elementary school or high school, and people will literally, you know, with self-esteem just destroyed, and they're 25, they're 30, and you know, well, how did this happen? How did you just, and sometimes it has influences at home, and that's another whole thing, is bullying can happen within the home as well, but that somebody told them, often, you know, some girl in grade 6 said I was ugly, and so I've always thought of myself as ugly ever since. And you know, those early influences are so significant that you see an example like Amanda Todd or something. This is a very acute example where somebody is so traumatized that they kill themselves. But in practice, for every Amanda Todd, there are 100 people flying under the radar who are carrying scars from either being different, you know, heavy, thin, different, have a different sexuality.
All short.
That to this day, you know, whatever age they are, still believe on some fundamental level, you know, I'm not good enough. That somebody told me, because at that early age, they start to believe the bully. And that is, you know, so, I mean, it shows you how the child can be affected, and how that any input goes. So, yeah.
How powerful words can be, because that's another thing, because the physical stuff obviously is serious, traumatic, difficult, but the verbal stuff, the isolation that kids, especially young girls, can do to these are so traumatic, so life-changing for many people. That, as you're seeing, and I've seen in my own experience, leads to significant mental health concerns for people who have been victimized. And I know tonight we're talking about depression and anxiety, and in my experience, that's one of the big kind of mental health piece that seems to lead, bullying seems to lead somehow. Not to say that it's causing, because as you said earlier, there could be other things, because there are a number of factors. There could be other things going on with that individual person that makes them susceptible to, you know, taking on what people are saying. Maybe they're predisposed to mental health concerns, but outside of those, just by having vicious, unkind, insensitive things said about you, done to you, that in itself really impacts and really affects a person's self-image, their self-esteem, and that in itself, when you're so beaten, can lead into issues of depression, anxiety.
Yeah, absolutely. And I was just thinking that, you know, one of the things, and I think that physical bullying, you know, we have zero tolerance for.
Right.
If somebody hits somebody
Exactly.
else, because this is enshrined in law, you know, there's
Exactly.
this is an assault, and we have rules about that. When it gets into the verbal stuff, not so much, you know, because we have, you know, some people would say, well, you have freedom of speech. You're allowed to say what you want. So where do we, you know, unless we, you know, create what we're getting close to doing now, which is making sort of bullying a version of hate crime, right?
Yeah.
But until that, it was like, well, what do you do? Words, you know, there's no rule against that. You can say what you want, you know, it's not nice, don't do that anymore.
Right.
But yeah, but in terms of the consequences, yeah, depression, anxiety, ultimately self-harm, self-esteem, you know, lifelong effects on self-esteem. Yeah.
Lifelong. You can't stress that too much, because I've seen it, and I know you have
Yeah.
too, and it's devastating.
Yeah.
Because we're mentioning depression, anxiety, and for viewers out there who may be sitting and thinking, well, you know, what exactly is depression? What exactly? Because we're talking about depression. You know, there's somebody feeling down, a little bit sad.
Right.
Maybe you can
Okay.
kind of define for us.
So okay, and that would, you know, in some sense, that would be a depression if something bad happens, a family member dies, that we feel sad or blue. Depression, and there's a number of different definitions, but let's say basically an overwhelming sadness or grief, sort of a loss of hopelessness, often resulting in not wanting to do the activities that you've done anymore, often with sleeping more or sometimes sleeping not at all, weight changes. I mean, ultimately, although something starts it off, you get into a situation where, because of the added stress, this is a genuine now mental illness, you know, brought on by the conditions, and that's where you see, like, normally, your average young person doesn't suffer from depression.
That's right.
But you know, pick an Amanda Todd or whatever, you know, she was on all kinds of medications for depression and anxiety. Well, you know, that's not from day-to-day living for a 16-year-old. Those are the consequences of that abuse, that you know, the stress, huge stress that it causes on the body. So depression would be, yeah, that overwhelming sadness that leaves us without any feeling of, like, hope for the future sometimes. So I don't know how far you want to get in, like what a child exhibits that's experiencing depression, or if you want to wait.
Before we get to that, because because for the audience to understand depression, and you've clearly explained that. We're going to be right back.